I'm Dennis Barnard, and with me is Dr. RAEDENE Copeland, and today we're going to talk about leadership in general. I think we can say that right now the world of business is in turmoil because of outside factors, of economic and political, but now our friend the pandemic has turned us inwards on ourselves, looking at the situation within business, and there is a lot of crisis. And one thing for sure has happened in this crisis is that the quality of leadership seems to be very much more under the microscope. So RAEDENE is going to talk to us about these different types of leaders that we're going to encounter in this, and possibly how they can be interacting to either get us out of the mess we're in, or to bring us further into the mess. And we know what's happening in the headlines. So let's take some of these examples that we have and analyze how they will relate to what's actually happening in the workplace right now. So over to you, RAEDENE.
Hi, Dennis. How are you today? I'm so happy to be here with you. How are you?
Fine, thank you. A bit warm here, but it's hitting in the 30 degrees or something. But no, I'm fine. And, I'm looking forward to this discussion because I know that you and I had a number of very good discussions on these topics before. So this is going to be interesting.
Yes, I think for the past couple of months, Dennis and we have really been exploring some of the vicissitudes in the human resources and leadership market, and what has been going on since the pandemic, and how a lot of employees and leaders and some in various departments were heavily affected, like in HR. So we were really exploring what is the new reality, because after you go through something as, I guess, transformative, which will change the appetites, but also impact companies, corporations, their profits and their ideologies in different ways.
Much.
Yes, what does that leave for the employee who was rising in ranks and got kicked out? Or what does that leave for corporate culture when a number of big corporations laid off a number of employees? So we were just bantering around, as we usually do, analyzing the different types of leaders and what we can interestingly deduct about, what is real.
Yeah, I think you've identified five types of leadership.
Yeah.
All of which are interacting right now. And I'm sure, when we talk about these, we'll identify the people we probably recognize in our own working lives.
Exactly.
And as I've said before, it's very much under the microscope. What was accepted before, when the leader issues an edict, like saying you're all going to return to the office. Well, a lot of people aren't doing it. And that, you might say, well, that's total disobedience and the company is right and what the company says is right. But there's questioning of these. And actually, some of these people may actually not be leaders. I mean, that's for another day, maybe. But I mean, I'll leave that to you to kind of lead us into that one.
Exactly. So, well, let's get started. Number one on my list is something that's popularized. So we'll start with the popular terms and we'll go into the ones that we came up with that we thought was interesting. So, leader. And we discussed the transformative leader as that person who is competent, but also a positive way of leveling people up or engaging with people or doing people management, so they're able to produce other leaders and have that track record of maybe producing future leaders and also changing culture. But Derek, you had a very interesting take on the transformative leaders, so I'm going to give it back to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, being transformative means operating on a pretty high voltage across sometimes a wide range of fields. And my feeling about the transformative leader is probably because of that effort that has to go in, they may not be what you'd call for the long haul. And in fact, they could, if they don't take care, they could actually burn out quite easily. So they have to be nurtured, and it could be that they have a transformative role. And once they've achieved the transformation, the, shall we say, relatively humdrum activity of a transformed organization may not either be for them as well.
So Dennis, I have a thought here. So is it that the transformative leader is definitely needed, right? Because that leader more than likely is able to achieve positive culture change.
Yeah.
But the transformative leader needs to be coached on how to coach the upcoming set of leaders, build a strong team. So at some point, the transformative leader can step back and they have well-oiled machines. So as you say, they do not burn out. Because if the transformative leader is taking on the burden of always transforming, and most of the burden is on the leader to transform all the time, then there may be some delegation issues and so forth. So people may love the leader, but if the leader is not delegating,
I think you've raised a very good point there, because the person in front chopping with a machete through the jungle is not always going to stop and show the people behind how to use the machete. Often leaders go cutting their lone paths, leaving everything else in their wake, and they're not perhaps always too good at remembering to mentor those that come behind. So again, that's another little aspect they have to be aware of.
Exactly. So transformative leaders are needed to improve cultures, but our caveat is that the transformative leader needs to be mindful of burnout.
Yes.
And to always keep their eye on producing future leaders and building a strong team so they can also to the next level and leave things better than they found it. So that's the transformative leader. Okay. So number two, we have the competent leader. And the competent leader, I think, has a very positive positioning if you think of brand positioning, right? Because the competent leader is definitely good at tasks. They're good at tasks. So whatever you assign them, they will complete it. What we did to further delve into the competent leader is that we looked up definitions of a leader versus a manager. And Dennis, do you want to tell the audience what you found, what you find the differences?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you've identified part of that spirit of a leader is to inspire. And I don't think necessarily the competent leader is going to inspire in the way that we think. My feeling was the competent leader is the one who gets in early, works hard, maybe mentors the people around them, throws themselves into the job. What I'm thinking about, and leads by example, as I say, I like the work ethic, I like so on. But as I think I've said to RAEDENE earlier, I'm having a little bit of, not confusion, but I think there's a very fine line between the competent leader and the manager. The definition, in a sense, is the manager is working to an agreed script to get to an agreed end. I think the leader is the one who's almost writing their own script. They know what the objective is, but they're going to get there under their own way. I think that might be, if we're going to discriminate between the two and trying to divide the two, I think that might be one of the criteria that we would say, is this manager actually creating their own script or following another person's script? But the competent leader certainly has a place. And I think, those who like to lead by example, because they don't have the great charisma or whatever to be incredibly memorable, they are competent. And I think they have a very key place in things, certainly.
Yes. Exactly. And you hit on a very important point there. Remember, I did a post on this on LinkedIn some months ago, but just this idea of true leaders that can get companies out of crisis sometimes.
Yeah.
They cannot always be 100% rule followers. And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean, it has nothing to do with you doing anything illegal. It has to do with the competent leader may be safe. The competent leader may not have a lot of innovative, strategic problem solving because they're just following the book.
Yeah.
They're afraid to ever buck the system for maybe the rights of their direct reports and so forth. So what happens is that no one can accuse them of not showing up to work on time, not doing their tasks, but their direct reports may not report someone who they felt they had an advocate in, right? So it's almost as if they're like, hey, my leader is there. My leader is very responsible, very nice. But I cannot say that if I were in a bind, I had the confidence that this competent leader would make a difference when I really need it. So that's what it is. There's a lot of rule following, a lot of playing it safe, a lot of protecting their space, title, and money by just putting their head down, doing their job, and not getting too involved with any issue that seems slightly controversial or requires a higher level of interpersonal savvy and negotiation. Yes. So that's what we think the competent leaders. Who do we have next? Number 3.
The unmerited leader. Okay, the unmerited leader. There, I suppose, in a nutshell, we say they are the leaders who are there in name only.
That part.
They got there, heavens knows how.
That part.
Yes, I mean, there's plenty of roads that lead to that particular destination, aren't there? It could be their networking, it could be whatever. I mean, in recent decades, there has appeared a sort of a carousel of CEOs who rotate around between various companies.
Yes.
On occasion, the shareholders have revolted and said, actually, we don't want this person.
Yes.
And also there could be included the people like who have followed in the footsteps of what would be called bigger leader personalities, who've been groomed by those leaders for greatness, but actually failed. And I think we've seen examples of that at GEC. I think we've seen examples of that at Disney, where the people who were groomed to take over actually failed spectacularly. So they were handed the mantle, as it were. They were anointed, but they actually weren't the real McCoy. They didn't merit getting to there, and therefore they weren't really leaders. They were unmerited leaders. That's my take on it. There's plenty of them out there.
Yes, well, yes, and it's so funny that when you started talking, my brain went somewhere we didn't discuss, but you actually touched on it. So I thought about this idea of the Peter principle, right? Getting promoted to your level of incompetence.
Totally.
And what I also thought about is the fact that the unmerited leader may have been merited at some point, but they may get promoted, as you say, through networking, through strong relationships with the leaders at the corporation, through being charismatic, even though there may not be a lot of substance. So then they may be the leader who's riding on the tail codes of their direct reports, and their direct reports are doing most of the substantive work, but they're the ones who know how to talk a good game. They keep getting titles because maybe they're good with sales and maybe they're good with marketing themselves, but it's very clear every time they get into a role or they leave an org, there's a trail of mess. Absolutely. Not a lot of leaders develop. The vision is not operating well. And they have been Peter Principle. And I was also thinking about sports. And you went to this, the idea of the carousel, right? The leader carousel, and how I watched a lot of sports. Well, a lot is a stretch, but I love sports. I watch the NFL and I watch basketball and so forth. But you see this where they'll make a comment like, this leader must interview really well and must be the nicest person, because there's not a track record of success.
Yeah.
But this leader keeps getting these positions
Yes.
over and over again with the same results. And people keep hiring them, which
no, you're quite right. I love the expression, which I read a few times, that they rose without trace. I just on a slightly controversial note, I'm never fully convinced of the idea of succession planning. And I'll tell you for why. If somebody is identified as the heir apparent, they actually can stop trying. They are anointed. They know they're going to get it. And I've seen that happen a few times, that actually the minute an heir apparent is appointed, the person they're going to replace actually clings on tighter to power. And of course, at the very top, the thing that never really pleases me about succession plans is they put all these wonderful plans in place, but when a new CEO is needed, they don't step up the next person from below. The shareholders say, we want a big hitter and we're going to bring him instant from somewhere else. And if you can't make your succession plan work at the top, how on earth are you ever going to try and impose it on the rest of the organization? So it's a bit controversial, I know, but these things never always convince me. But there we go.
I love it. I love it because it is controversial, because to me, succession planning is definitely necessary, right? Not because in your example, you're thinking of people who are alive and well. I am thinking of the unfortunate situation where, let's say the leader dies and you have not been identifying qualified persons. So then when your leader either ups and quits or passes or something like that, you have no succession plan. So who gets it? The unmerited leader.
The unmerited leader, the PR person. Yeah, no. I think you're right. I think that publicly anointing somebody as a successor is probably not the way to go. I think that those who may be likely are the ones perhaps an organization should be investing skill and development in, so that they can step up. But and that could be across a range of people, across a range of activities. But I think the minute you come out and say, I name this person as my successor when I'm going to retire in 3 years' time, I think it's fatal. But and I've seen it really backfire a couple of times. And funnily enough, the minute that I've seen this happen, the minute a successor is kind of given the orb and the scepter, the incumbent suddenly starts to decide, oh my God, I'm actually want to be indispensable, and they actually make life quite difficult for the successor, So one of the things I suspect is, and you're more the psychologist than I am, is that actually people don't like to think that they could be replaced. I saw one managing director in my experience was so enamored with their idea of indispensability that instead of naming one successor, they actually split the role in two and gave it to two people who actually made a terrible mess of it. But it's like saying, well, no one person can possibly replace me. So I think there's that little bit of psychology at play there. You'll probably identify that one better than I can.
I don't know. This just came to me. I have to look up the definition of Herculean complex or so. It's like, oh, you're so big and large that somebody couldn't possibly.
Yes.
I'm so competent and transformative that, these mere mortals could never step in and do that. And yes, but what I want to add though is that in succession planning, it is vitally important, because with succession planning, if you're thinking of it not in the way that maybe you have identified, but in a way of, we need to keep an eye out for developing future leaders. Right. And if that does not happen, I think it's actually pretty selfish, because it's not about you're making it about you and not the organization. Some people do not want to think of their time moving on. It's almost like somebody never doing a will, right? And I'm not look,
I think it absolutely that way. I mean, you know, the minute you make the will, it really starts circling around, taking your temperature. No.
Tell people that you're making a will, but if you're thinking, hey, what happens when I pass on? Like, you could up and die, like not up and die. You can up and escape and just disappear. And people are like, we haven't seen that person for 5 years, but you left something in place. The point is that succession planning is there. So you leave things better than you found it. It does not have to be one person identified. Succession planning is a mindset of you saying, I want to ensure if I am no longer here, be it that I decide this no longer works for me, I take another opportunity, God forbid I pass, that I have developed a number of leaders that you can interview and decide who is best for the zeitgeist. So that's how I see
I think that's definitely the way. That way you won't end up with your unmerited leader, which I think is key.
That is what we're trying to avoid. Okay. So, all right. So next we have the interim leader as leader type number 4. And I have to give it to you, Dennis. I feel as if you really blew my mind with that whole perspective on that. So even though, it's this idea of a leader who can only lead temporarily. And that is because that person psychologically knows that the role is temporary. So they can almost like boost up themselves, get all the energy, make all the tough decisions that they may not have made if they felt a little unsafe, right? Because the interim leader knows that I'm just here until you get somebody else. So I have seen that happen, where the person just made a whole lot of decisions, gave people, you get a car, you get a car, you get a house, like Oprah just gave out a whole set of stuff. Do we know if that was the fiscally responsible thing to do? No, but that's what interim looks like. An interim affords you, and if no one is going to stop it, the interim leader is able to do that. So that's why I'm going to stop and allow you.
I think that is a very good point. The interim leader, in order to get to what they want to do, can have that tendency to write checks that they're never going to have to cash. However, I would say I've acted as interim on a few occasions. And as I know myself quite well, I think in common with the transformative leader is we have somebody who's not really suited to the long haul. And it could well be, you know, the whole idea of you know, you're bridging a point, 2 points in time for an organization. And you could see a beginning and an end to it. If the idea was that you were never going to see an end to it, you might actually start to be less effective. I think it's very true to say that any interim should never be around too long, because anybody joining an organization has a kind of a halo period of about 6 months, after which you become part of the furniture and nobody listens to you the same as anybody else. So the interim leader has a task, in other words, to get from this point to that point with probably as little alarm and excursion and terrible things happening. So in other words, I think we said before, this is probably a fairly safe pair of hands. So showing tendencies of the competent leader as well, somebody who's actually able to pick up the thing quite quickly, identify where we're going along this finite stream of time, and actually put things in place to make it happen. And I would find that, for instance, would not have elements of the transformative leader. The interim leader is very much as we were before, continuity to take us to the next point in time where we get a permanent person or whatever. So again, a key person, and every organization is going to need some of these at some point or another. So it's important to remember. Sorry, I I would say the temptation usually is because of a fairly event-free 6 or 9 months, the organization will say, hey, this person's done a great job. Let's offer them the permanent job. And I think, as you pointed out, Radine, that might not always be the best thing.
I mean, that also, yeah, exactly.
They may not react well to that. You know?
Exactly. And may I add a distinction for the audience listening? Because I know that there are, you know, when I think of marginalized groups and so forth, there has been, you know, trends spoken of where marginalized, high-performing employees may get interim often, even though they have the chops to be the leader and the desire to be a leader long term. But they're fighting these subconscious societal stereotypes of who is meant to be in those leadership roles and earn those salaries, right? So that's one thing. So I don't want anyone to get offended thinking like, well, I was an interim leader and I wanted to be a leader, but I don't get it, because there's a lot of structural and political things that go into how decisions are made. But I do want to go to the category that you spoke of, which is critically important, and that is the person that honestly is honest with themselves. They're like, I dig interiming. Like, interiming is my jam because I can go in. I know it's a short period. I actually don't like being a people leader. I prefer being an individual contributor or just being at a lower level. I remember the first time I dated a guy who told me, Radine, they've asked me to be a people manager and so forth many times. And I know within myself, I am not cut out for that. And I remember it really challenged my thinking of, wow, you know, you just naturally think you do the job, people want you to go to the next level, you go. But I found that there are people who are more self-aware of their bandwidth, right? Their stress bandwidth and their energy bandwidth and what they have left. And they will say, I can interim, but I will never want to be in that full role. So I wanted to just clarify that for our listeners. So the last and most exciting leader is the hidden leader.
Yes.
Okay. So we have a couple minutes left, and we're going to talk about the hidden leader. So
this is one we identified, isn't it, in the discussion, one we hadn't considered before. I think you can encapsulate this maybe best for us before we wrap up.
Definitely. Yes, hidden leader is the number 5 leader, which I think is so important for new leaders to identify. It's that gatekeeper. It's the gatekeeper, and that gatekeeper may not have a title. Okay, the gatekeeper may not have a title. So when you're a new leader, you need to scan the landscape of your corporation. Even if you're on one level and you're in the same organization, you see things differently when you rise and now you have a title because they're gatekeepers. Now, what we discussed is that this gatekeeper may be a positive gatekeeper, and that may be someone you're like, hey, I'm new to this org, so I may need to to almost like invite in and identify the positive gatekeepers who can influence the employee groups, right? To act in a way that I need them to act, or to buy into policies that I need them to buy into to get to the next level. The issue comes in when you have that gatekeeper who is a toxic gatekeeper. And what we were discussing is that that toxic gatekeeper is always slippery. I use this word eely, like they're very slippery and they're very wise. It's just that they're using their wisdom and competence for what was the word I'm looking for?
Well, they're kind of they're manipulative. I think that you will never come face to face on an issue with this person, because most of the actions that they actually generate will be fronted by other members of the department. You will find that issue with them because they won't put themselves in the front line, and therefore it's rather more difficult to either identify them or take action over them as well.
Exactly. They're pretty savvy
Yes.
I think they're good. I would say they're good sales people. They're good negotiators.
Yeah.
The issue is not, it's not for lack of talent. Now, I will say the toxic gatekeeper does not necessarily have to be super competent in terms of their job or roles, because they may get other people to complete their tasks or do their tasks. What they do have is the power of influence.
Yes,
They have
personality. They have power of
they have the
personality.
power of influence, and they have people doing their bidding. So they actually, they hide under that cloak of just what's the word I'm looking for? That cloak of, like, they don't
Well,
and they may never take the title. They may never take a
no,
title. Actually.
and they probably wouldn't want the responsibility.
That is the point.
But they will continue to use the other members of the department as what we might call human shields.
Exactly. I go to say the cloak of anonymity, but
yeah.
They may not be anonymous, but you also may not be able to touch them. So you may know exactly who that toxic person is, but the person is so eely, so slippery.
Well,
that
yeah.
you may not be able to touch them.
I had one, and I thought, I'm going to try and harness this power for good. So I said to her, I said, look, why don't we work together on this? I'll make you deputy supervisor or something. And she said, no, I don't want that responsibility.
Exactly.
And also, they would be worried about the new dynamic between them and those staff members, because they're not one of them anymore. They're one of them up there. And that could actually change everything. So they will run away from that responsibility for sure.
Exactly. Exactly. So there are our 5 types. Just to repeat, we have transformative leader, competent leader, unmerited leader, the interim leader, and the hidden leader. So as I've just listed, those are the 5 types of leaders. We want to thank you for joining us today and listening to our session. Dennis, thank you for leading the way.
No, thank you
for bringing us in. Yes. And let us know if you have any questions. Just drop it in the comments and we would start the discussion. Let us know what you think. Thank you.
Thank you now. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.